Hello and welcome. My name is Emma. I am an English language teaching assistant here at the school, and I am here to teach you English and help you learn about English culture. For my video this week, I thought I would do a Jane Austen book shuffle where I go through all of Jane Austen's books and sort of tell you what I think about each one. I'll say ahead, I'm a huge fan of all of her books. I'll try not to spoil things too much for you if you haven't read them, but I'm a very keen Jane Austen fan. Unfortunately, all of my books are back in England at the moment. I don't have them on me. I do, however, have my Pride and Prejudice Kindle cover, so I have a bit of memorabilia with me, but not the books, sadly. I think Jane Austen is often overlooked as just a sort of generic romance writer. I think a lot of people forget that she was incredibly influential. She was a writer at the beginning of the 19th century. And she honestly was one of the first people writing about women. If you look at the representation of women in literature before this, it is quite sparse. Even if you look at Shakespeare plays, most Shakespeare plays don't have any prominent female characters, or even in things like Taming of the Shrew and Macbeth, the female characters don't have huge roles and don't really influence the plot as much as you would think. Whereas Jane Austen decided to write books all about women, giving them their own minds and personalities, and really defying a lot of tropes and stereotypes that women had been associated with, such as women being sickly, vain, fickle creatures. She wrote them to be intelligent, have their own personalities, and even when women were the villains, they were still very, intelligent, crafty, cunning, and not what people expected at the time. Of course, we have an abundance of women in literature nowadays, so that has been forgotten, but we do owe Jane Austen a lot for so successfully being able to write about women. She also popularised a form of writing called free indirect discourse, which is basically where you'd be reading from one character's perspective and then suddenly swap to another character's perspective. So you get the main character had most of the pages, but you'd also have other characters who would be present as well, and you would see their ideas and thoughts and feelings. The notable thing about this is that what she would frequently do, she did it quite a bit in the novel Emma and also a little bit in Pride and Prejudice, was she would use this free indirect discourse to go to other characters and reveal issues to the reader of which the narrator or the main character was not aware. So in the novel Emma, there was stuff going on that Emma was not aware of. It helped to build a sense of mystery. It helps the reader to engage more in the novel if they know something that the main characters don't. And it was a very new thing that she did. A lot of people have copied it since, so it's very, very normal to find in books now, but she was sort of the first person to try this style of writing. So she's influential in many ways, partially, largely in women's literature, but also just in writing in general. And so I wanted to have a look at some of her books and see what we all think. So let's get started. So I thought I'd start with Sense and Sensibility. For anyone who thinks that Jane Austen books are just about romance, I think Sense and Sensibility would prove them wrong, because romance very much takes a backseat to the story of Eleanor and Marianne Dashwood, two sisters who fall on hard times and sort of have to stick together, work together to get through it. They are polar opposites. Marianne is very outgoing, very lively, and doesn't really use logic as much as she uses her heart. Eleanor instead uses her head more. She's very introverted, very sensible, but doesn't really share her feelings that much. So both of these sisters, of course, go through a lot. It's absolutely beautiful to watch their sisterly bond. In terms of romance, it's still a very sweet novel because the two men in it are very lovely guys. They're just very, very sweet men who care a lot about the ladies that they're in love with. They have some Edward and Colonel Brandon have some really sweet love stories, so it works well in that degree. Also, there are plenty of other characters in the novel to befriend the main two girls, such as Mrs. Jennings and her family. She is distantly related to the Dashwoods. She takes them in and looks after them. she develops a very beautiful relationship with the girls. So it's lovely to see a lot of really standout characters who kind of create this really wholesome book, which helps these two sisters sort of grow and learn from each other and also fall in love. The book has been criticised because lots of people say, well, Marianne has a really big arc in the book of learning to be more sensible and more logical. Eleanor doesn't have the same arc, although I would defend it by saying Eleanor's arc is that she stops being so introverted and starts learning to express herself, which I think is something that a lot of people can learn from. So Sense and Sensibility, yeah, I would thoroughly recommend it. It's a great book about sisterly affection and sisterly love, as well as being a really, really sweet romance. Next up is, of course, Pride and Prejudice, the classic. There is a reason why it is the classic. It is the love story of Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy. Elizabeth being very outgoing, perhaps quite arrogant and a bit judgmental. Mr. Darcy similarly is very proud, prejudges people, doesn't give them a second chance. But these two people figure out that they were misjudging each other and they were wrong about each other, and the story kind of becomes about how important second chances are, how you cannot judge someone upon first sight. This was quite a new theme at the time. It's very, very overused at the moment, people misjudging each other, but Pride and Prejudice was one of the first books to ever use this sort of trope where you get characters who didn't get along because they needed to learn about each other and understand each other. It is the perfect format for building characters as people realise they were wrong and people change and adapt into better people. Mr. Darcy and Lizzie Bennet really complement each other, they really help each other move on, but they also accept each other for their flaws, which I think is what makes it a really sweet romance. They're very different people, but also they're both very lovely, and I think we can all agree they really belong together. Again, it's not just about romance. Elizabeth has really developed friendship with her friend Charlotte, and Charlotte goes through quite an arc where she marries a man she doesn't love, which kind of shows you what women were faced with at the time, of being forced to marry someone they didn't love just to avoid being a spinster. That is genuinely quite a tale of caution, which you might not expect from books like this. You've also got Elizabeth's sisters who are getting into trouble. Elizabeth has a great relationship with her family. Her sisters make for quite interesting characters, and a sisterly affection and sisterly bonds are very important in the book. But of course they do get their own storylines and story arcs, and they all make for quite interesting characters, again kind of showing what life was like for women at the time, maybe some of the choices that they were reduced to for various reasons. It is a very heartwarming story about love, overcoming issues, and about how people can be flawed but can still have their happy ending, as well as being a story about feminism, about women. It's a very beautiful romance. There is a clear reason why it is one of the most popular books of all time. I do find it annoying that adaptations often focus more on chemistry and tension, as opposed to the fact that second chances and being wrong about people and misjudging people are such important themes in the book. But generally I think the book speaks for itself. I think it's a beautiful novel. I think, Miss Austen, it really is her masterpiece. And yes, again, like Sensibility, I would thoroughly recommend it if you want to read a book about flawed characters overcoming their flaws and sort of working together. So, continuing on with the theme of flawed characters, we come to Jane Austen's Emma, my namesake, let's say. Emma's a great book for reading about characters who are flawed and their mistakes have consequences. Emma's character flaws and errors drive most of the novel, which is quite interesting. Again, this is another reason why I think Jane Austen works so well as a writer, is because she wrote such good flawed characters, and would also write them to have consequences for their actions, which I think is what makes Emma a very powerful book. So Emma believes herself to be a matchmaker and is constantly trying to pair people off. Unfortunately, this turns out badly for some people, but of course things kind of work themselves out. Emma realises her flaws, and things turn out well at the end of the day. Mr. Knightley is Emma's love interest. They do have a very sweet romance. They are friends before they fall in love, so there is a lot of affection there. They really care about each other. They know each other very, very well, which is a really nice dynamic to read through. They constantly bicker, but ultimately there is a lot of love behind all of their banter. I do have an issue a bit with the age difference. I think Knightley is quite a lot older than Emma, and he says at some point he can remember holding her when she was a baby. It was a bit weird, but generally it's not weird enough to get in the way of the story, especially as Emma, I think, is in the sort of early 20s in the novel. So again, Emma was one of the first books which used free indirect discourse to inform the reader of events that Emma didn't actually know about. It kind of helped to show that Emma wasn't as knowledgeable as she thought. It helped show the flaws in her characters, and is a trope that has been used throughout literature since then. So Emma was very influential, and it was just a great look at how flawed characters can make mistakes, but ultimately work past them if they realise them, and help to resolve issues that they have caused. So next we come to Northanger Abbey. Northanger Abbey doesn't have quite the same high stakes as some of the others, but I do find it a very, very cute, very sweet love story. It's not my favourite of the bunch, but I think it's the most adorable for me. Northanger Abbey is kind of a coming-of-age story about Catherine, our main character, Catherine Morland. She is a real introvert. She's very shy. She loves reading books and struggles to tell the difference between books and reality. It's an issue that gets her into trouble a few times, but she sort of gradually grows up, comes into herself, becomes a bit more independent, which is a very lovely story arc to see her go through. Like I've said before, Jane Austen books are often more about character development than they are about plot. I think that's why some people find them very slow and very dull. Admittedly, not much happens in Northanger Abbey, but I do find that there is a lot of character work in here, which really works well for me. Catherine Morland and her love interest Henry Tilney have a lovely relationship. Again, they are friends before they fall in love. But they have really lovely banter, they really get along, there is a lot of affection there, so it's lovely to see them together throughout the novel, just being friends and getting along with one another. Similarly, Catherine befriends Henry's sister, Eleanor. Eleanor and Catherine form their own really special friendship. Eleanor, again, is very shy, introverted, but she's very, very intelligent, very wise, so it's a lovely dynamic to see. It's very important to me that reading relationships between women in particular who really care about each other and who really get along, so that's a really lovely relationship to read about. There are also other side characters I really enjoy in Northanger Abbey, such as the Allens or Catherine's family, all of whom are very lovely people. Yes, there are a few more villains in this one. They do get a bit more time, and it is a kind of shame to see Catherine be taken in, but it does sort of help her story arc overall. It shows you how not everyone is who they appear to be, so all of that is very well written. And yeah, I think Henry Tilney is a really sweet romantic hero to have in this. He obviously respects Catherine, he adores her. He's just, again, a very sweet, nice guy, which is very underrated in romantic heroes, I find. I don't think you need to be brooding or brutal or, a bad boy or anything. I think it really works that Henry is just a genuinely lovely person who cares a lot about Catherine. It's a very beautiful romance. No, it's not as tense and dramatic as some of the other books, but it's very cute, it's very sweet, it's very, very heartwarming and wholesome, and I would thoroughly recommend if you're looking for maybe a bit of an easier read. Now, Persuasion. I think Persuasion is my favourite Jane Austen novel. So first of all, a bit about the themes of the novel. This novel, more than the others, I think tackles class as a theme really well. So Anne Elliot, she is the daughter of a gentleman, a sort of aristocrat, but she finds that she prefers the company of who are considered to be more middle class or lower class people, as opposed to the aristocracy that she finds quite dull. This was kind of one of the first mockeries of the aristocracy. Of course, in lots of other things, they do mock various kings and queens and aristocrats, but this one was more direct, with Anne preferring the company of poorer people. So it's just quite interesting to see that in this kind of book there is a bit of a class difference there, which I found very entertaining, and some of it is very sweet. Persuasion is full of very sweet side characters because, again, there isn't really much of a villain in this story. There are some nasty characters, of course, but they don't do much. I would say the issues more surround Anne Elliot and her romance with Captain Wentworth, who was in the Navy. Again, came from a lower class, but he went to the Navy and became richer, and then there is also a class struggle there of whether or not he should be accepted into higher society because he is richer, even though he was born poorer. But the plot mainly surrounds their romance and their feelings for one another. So the plot largely centres around the fact that Anne and Wentworth were engaged when they were 19. Anne broke off the engagement because Wentworth was lower class and couldn't provide for her, but she has regretted it ever since, and when she is 27 he comes back into her life, now richer, and she is still in love with him, but he appears not to be in love with her, but it's more because he doesn't want to get his heart broken again. So, the idea of persuasion, that she was persuaded to, abandon him instead of marrying him, and the book largely centres around Anne kind of finding her confidence again. Anne, again, is quite an introverted character, but we do find out she is quite bold. She has her own ideas and opinions and thoughts. She's very, very intelligent. This was against the stereotype at the time that women were fickle and often used to change their minds, and even though she might appear fickle to many people, does have her own thoughts, opinions and ideas. She's a very strong personality, she just doesn't express it that much, but she does use it in order to look after the people she cares about. She's a very caring character. I love Anne. She's an amazing character. I really love her. And yeah, I really love the story. It was also unusual at the time because, as I said, the story takes place when Anne is 27. That is much older than the traditional heroine at the time. Most of these other heroines would have been younger than 22. Say even in later years, say the Brontes wrote books about women who were 18 going on 20. That sort of age. So the fact that Anne is a bit older, she's a bit wiser. Yes, she's quiet, but she does have this sort of inner world that she lives in. I think she's a great character to follow. I think she is surrounded by really fun characters, such as her in-laws. Her sister is married to a really lovely family, Charles, who has some sisters. And they all really accept Anne, even though she isn't technically married into that family. They all accept her and welcome her. I'm not hugely fussed over Frederick Wentworth, I will admit, but I do think his character flaws do provide a good arc. Basically, Frederick learns to forgive Anne for abandoning him all those years ago and decides that he could either be angry with her or he could forgive her and they could be happy together. He does have quite a nice arc. Again, forgiveness is an important theme in this book. And the book also doesn't feel too long or too slow. Again, not much happens in it. It is mainly character work, but I think it is well paced, and I think it's very, very enjoyable if you are into the premise. It's about how love can blossom from unlikely situations, how people make mistakes sometimes, but if you forgive them, often it would be, it reflects better on yourself. Giving people second chances is very important. So Persuasion, thoroughly recommend Persuasion. I think it is my favourite Jane Austen book. It's a very, very beautiful book. As well, the films that have been made based on it, I thoroughly enjoy them. So yeah, that is Jane Austen's Persuasion. So now we get to Mansfield Park. I'll be honest, Mansfield Park is the book I have most mixed feelings about. My issues with it, first of all, I don't particularly like the love interest, Edmund. I'm not fussed over him. He kind of ignores Fanny for most of the book, and then suddenly sort of decides he wants to be in love with her. I don't really care for him. I don't really think he creates a satisfactory ending for our main character, Fanny Price, but he is fine. Also, like I said, most of the book is character work, but this book does feel particularly slow. There really isn't much going on, and there aren't as many likeable characters. The story is about Fanny Price, who comes to live with her cousins, the Bertrams. She gets along with her cousin Edmund, but not really any of her other cousins. She falls in love with her cousin Edmund, ultimately ends up with him. But her other cousins, I would just say, aren't as pleasant. Maria, Julia, and Tom, I believe their names are. I don't enjoy them as much as characters. The Crawfords, again, kind of scheming people. So you don't get the same warmth you get from things like Northanger Abbey or Persuasion, where you're sort of surrounded by really likeable people. Saying that, I think Fanny Price is an amazing protagonist. I think she's really original and really unique and different. Fanny Price was very much based on a lot of the stereotypes of women of the era, the idea that women were kind of just stupid but pleasant beings. Fanny Price is ill a lot of the time. She faints a couple of times during the novel. She's quite weak, and she's seen as everyone as being this kind of sweet, naive, well-meaning girl who doesn't really have a brain. In fact, even though Fanny is very sickly and does get unwell very easily, she is very intelligent. She has, when you read it, you see she has an inner world. She's very observant. She actually kind of understands everything that's going on around her, more so than most of the characters do. She's a very interesting character, like I say, again, very unique, because she falls right into some stereotypes and tropes, like being sickly, but goes completely against others, like the fact that she is very, very smart. I personally always felt that Fanny was just intelligent enough to know that she needed to be quiet and kind of obey people, and that is where her sort of goodness comes from, as opposed to kind of her naturally choosing it. Fanny Price is a character who has been interpreted in many, many different ways, and when you either read the book or watch the film, I would recommend reading the book personally. When you read or watch it, I think you guys will come up with your own interpretation of her. She's quite a difficult character to pin down, just because not everything about her makes complete sense. She has a lot of different personality traits, and that is what makes this such a good book. It is my least favourite of the Jane Austen books, but I still really enjoy it. Some people say it's their favourite, and I completely understand why. I think it's because Fanny is such a great character, and to be honest, it's kind of a shame that I'm not bothered about her love interest. So her ending when she gets married, I don't really care as much for it, just because I honestly think Fanny deserved better. I am, however, glad that she did not end up with Henry Crawford. In the book, Fanny is pursued by a man called Henry Crawford. He is kind of the bad boy stereotype. Jane Austen genuinely got into an argument with her sister when she was writing the book, because her sister wanted Fanny to end up with Henry Crawford and not with Edmund. Lots of people still believe that. There are even some adaptations where she ends up with Henry instead of Edmund. I, however, think it's really good that Jane Austen took the bad boy stereotype of bad boy falling in love with this sort of nice, prim and proper girl, but instead showed that actually Fanny couldn't change him. Fanny couldn't fix him. You can't, fix someone by falling in love with the right person. That was a really original take on that kind of stereotype. It's a take that not many people take today. Still, there are too many books and films out there, I would say, where the bad boy kind of is fixed by falling in love with the right girl. But I think Mansfield Park works because she doesn't, because she stays on her own 2 feet. Fanny knows what she wants, and she does go after it in her own simple way. She does learn to get more confident, and meanwhile people around her learn to appreciate her even more, and I think that's a lovely story arc to watch. The book is much more focused on Fanny's personal story as opposed to her romance, which I really appreciate. And yeah, so if you want to watch, or read a book about character development and someone's personal journey, I think Mansfield Park would be the one for you. Like I say, it's not my personal favourite, but I do really enjoy the book, and I would thoroughly recommend it. So those are my personal opinions on the Jane Austen books. Some people may disagree with me. I do get that they're not for everyone, but I think they are classics for a reason. I think 200 years later they are still resonating with many, many people, and I will constantly recommend people to read them and watch all the adaptations, because I just really enjoy them. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you disagree with me, you have your own opinions about the books, whether or not you've read them or watched them in English or anything, please let me know. You can comment below, you can message me. If you'd like any more of these book shuffles where I go through the works of various authors, I'd be happy to do that again. But for now, it's goodbye from me and enjoy your week.